We will not allow Burkina Faso to be controlled by hidden foreign hands. Our sovereignty is not for sale. If any organization operates in this country, it must serve our people,
when a government shuts down
not outside
118
interests.
organizations in a single day without any warning or public discussion, people don't see it as a normal decision. They feel something is off. That's exactly what happened in Burkina Faso. The government said it was about national security and protecting the country from foreign influence, especially from Western-funded NGOs that might be pushing hidden political agendas. And honestly, for many people, that explanation makes sense because Africa has a long history of outside interference. But the real issue is not just the reason, it's the way it was done. When something this big happens so suddenly without transparency, it creates doubt. People start asking questions. Is this really about protection, or is it about control? Because when voices disappear overnight, it doesn't just remove organizations, it removes trust. And once people stop trusting the system, every future decision starts to feel questionable, even if it's meant to help. But the situation becomes much more complicated when you look at who was actually affected. Among the organizations that were dissolved were not just foreign-funded groups, but also local human rights organizations. These were people working on the ground documenting abuses, helping displaced families, and trying to keep some record of what's really happening in a country dealing with conflict. They weren't powerful political players. They were often the only link between suffering communities and the outside world. So when they were shut down along with everyone else, it sent a different message. It made it seem like the goal wasn't just to remove foreign influence, but also to remove independent voices. And when those voices disappear, only one version of reality remains, the government's version. In a situation where accurate information is already hard to find, this kind of move can change how truth itself is seen and understood by the public. If you look at the timeline, it doesn't feel like a sudden decision anymore. It starts to look like a planned sequence. First, in November 2025, NGOs were told to move their funds into a state-controlled bank. That might sound like a technical rule, but in reality, it gave the government financial control over these organizations. Then in January 2026, all political parties were dissolved. That's not a small step, that's reshaping the entire political system. And after that, the NGOs were completely shut down. When you connect these events, it feels less random and more like a step-by-step tightening of control. At the same time, the country is facing a serious humanitarian crisis. Burkina Faso requested nearly $800 million in aid but received only a small portion after distancing itself from France and building closer ties with Russia. That means less money, more pressure, and fewer independent actors, all happening at once. And that combination can deeply affect the future of a country. At the same time, in a completely different part of the world, a similar kind of tension is playing out in a different form. In South Africa, Julius Malema was sentenced to 5 years in prison for firing a rifle in the air at a political event years ago. The court said it was not a spontaneous act, but something planned, which made it a serious offense under the law. But here's where things get interesting. He is still free and active in parliament because his legal team managed to appeal the sentence, not the conviction. Now, the case could take years to fully resolve. And just like in Burkina Faso, people are divided in how they see this. Some believe the law is simply doing its job and holding a leader accountable. Others think the timing and context raise questions, especially because Malema is known for his strong and controversial political positions. It creates a deeper question in people's minds. When laws are used against powerful voices, is it always about justice, or can it sometimes be about control? And once that doubt exists, it becomes very hard to ignore. The debate around Julius Malema doesn't stop at the courtroom. It splits people into two completely different ways of thinking. On one side, there are those who say the law is simple. If you break it, you face the consequences. Firing a rifle in public, even at a political event, is dangerous and illegal, and no leader should be above that. From this view, the court is just doing its job, nothing more, nothing less. But on the other side, people see something deeper. They look at his strong stance on land reform and economic change, and they question the timing of the case. Why now? Why does it feel like legal pressure is increasing as his political voice becomes louder? For them, it's not just about a firearm incident from years ago, it's about whether the system is being used to quietly push back against someone who challenges it. And that's where the tension grows, because both sides believe they are right, but the truth is not so easy to separate. Now shift your focus to a completely different region where the stakes are even higher and the consequences affect the entire world. The situation between the United States and Iran has entered what looks like a pause, but not a real peace. There is talk of a ceasefire, a moment where both sides step back from direct conflict. But at the same time, the United States continues its naval blockade of Iranian ports. That means even though the guns may be quieter, the pressure hasn't actually reduced. It's like pressing pause on a fight while still holding your opponent in place. This kind of situation is fragile because it creates an illusion of calm, but underneath nothing has truly been resolved. People hear the word ceasefire and think things are improving, but in reality, the tension is still there, just waiting for the next move. Then comes the situation around the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important shipping routes in the world. Iran claims that it has opened the strait during this ceasefire period, suggesting that things are returning to normal. But at the same time, the United States says that no ships have actually moved through because of the ongoing blockade. And strangely, both of these statements can be true at the same time. The route might be technically open, but if no one is willing to risk sending ships through, then in reality, it's still blocked. This creates a very confusing situation where the truth depends on how you look at it. On paper, things seem fine, but in practice, nothing is moving. And in global trade, especially in oil transport, even a small disruption like this can have massive consequences. The real danger, however, lies in what could happen next. All it takes is one miscalculation. If Iran decides to test the situation by sending a ship through the blockade, it could trigger a direct response and the fragile ceasefire could collapse instantly. At the same time, there are threats of increasing pressure in other areas like the Red Sea and the Suez Canal corridor, which are also critical for global trade. This means the tension is not limited to one place, it can spread. And when multiple strategic routes are involved, the impact is not just regional, it becomes global. Prices, supply chains, and economies everywhere can feel the shock. That's why even a pause in conflicts doesn't feel safe. It feels temporary, uncertain, and one wrong move away from turning into something much bigger. When you step back and look at all these stories together, a pattern slowly becomes clear. It doesn't matter if it's Burkina Faso, South Africa, or the tension between the United States and Iran. The methods may look different, but the idea feels similar. Governments are using laws, security concerns, and administrative decisions as tools. On the surface, these tools are meant to protect people, maintain order, and keep nations stable, and sometimes they genuinely do. But at the same time, those same tools can also be used to silence voices that are inconvenient or difficult to control. That's where things start to feel uncomfortable, because the line between protection and control becomes very thin. And when that line is not clear, people don't know whether to feel safe or to feel watched. The real question that begins to form is simple but powerful: who are these systems really protecting? When NGOs disappear, when political leaders face long legal battles, and when global powers maintain pressure even during a ceasefire, it forces people to think deeper. Is the system protecting the public, or is it protecting itself? Because in every case there is a justification that sounds reasonable: national security, law enforcement, global stability. These are all important things. But when they are used repeatedly in ways that reduce transparency or limit opposition, people start to notice a pattern. And once people start noticing patterns, they start questioning intentions. That's when trust begins to weaken, not because of one decision, but because of a series of decisions that all seem to move in the same direction. Another thing that connects all these situations is how information is controlled or shaped. In places where independent organizations are shut down, fewer people are able to report what's really happening on the ground. In legal battles involving powerful figures, the narrative can shift depending on who is telling the story. And in international conflicts, even facts can sound contradictory, like something being open but not actually usable. This creates a world where truth is no longer simple. It becomes layered, selective, and sometimes even strategic. For ordinary people trying to understand what's going on, this makes everything harder, because when information itself becomes unclear, it's not just about what is happening. It's about what people are allowed to see and believe. In the end, what makes all of this so important is not just the events themselves, but what they represent for the future. If these patterns continue, they could slowly reshape how power works across different parts of the world. People might become more cautious about speaking out. Organizations might struggle to operate freely. And even global systems could become more tense and unpredictable. None of this happens overnight. It happens step by step, decision by decision. And that's why these stories matter. Not because they are isolated incidents, but because together they show a direction where power becomes more controlled, voices become more limited, and the space for disagreement becomes smaller. And once that space disappears, bringing it back becomes much harder than anyone expects.